Imagine you're a wealthy businessman. You've been approached by a friendly stranger who has a tip, a contact inside a telegraph office who can get you the results of horse races a few minutes before the bookmakers receive them. Not cheating exactly, just information, just timing. The stranger brings you to a place. It looks like a real wire service. Telegraph machines clicking, men in shirt sleeves scribbling odds on a chalkboard, a room full of bettors placing bets, noise, urgency, the smell of cigar smoke. You place a small bet. Your horse wins. You place a bigger bet. Your horse wins again. You're not being conned. You're the one with inside information. Then, your horse loses, and you realize, too late, that every single person in that room was an actor. The telegraph machines were props. The chalkboard was already written. The stranger was the opening move in a con that had been running with military precision since the 1920s. You've been inside a big store. I'm Johnny Diggs. Let's dig into this. To understand the con that inspired the film, you have to first understand the man who documented it. Not a cop, not a journalist. A linguistic professor from the University of Louisville named David Marr. Marr spent years in the 1930s embedded in the subculture of professional conmen, not undercover, openly. He was fascinated by their language, their slang, the argot they developed to communicate without civilians understanding them. He was the kind of academic who showed up where the interesting people were and earned enough trust to be allowed to listen. What he found, though, wasn't a loose collection of small-time grifters. It was a profession. Organized, hierarchical, geographically distributed, with its own ethics, its own rules, its own career ladder. And at the top of that ladder was what Marr called the Big Con. In 1940, Marr published The Big Con, The Story of the Confidence Man. The book documented the mechanics of long cons in extraordinary detail. The personnel, the procedures, the scripts, the specific roles, the geography of how marks were found and handled. Conmen were reportedly furious about it, not because it was inaccurate, but because it was exact. One of Marr's subjects told him the book was essentially a manual, that any reader who absorbed it would be impossible to con, because they'd be able to see the machinery operating around them in real time. And then, 33 years after it was published, a Hollywood writer named David Ward read it. Marr documented many types of long con, but the one that interests us today, the one that became the sting, was called The Wire. The Wire was, in Marr's taxonomy, the most sophisticated big con in active operation, and it required infrastructure. Here's how it worked. Step 1. The roper finds the mark. The roper is a skilled con man whose job is identifying wealthy, greedy targets, people with money and the willingness to use information they probably shouldn't have. The roper befriends the mark over days or even weeks, earns trust, eventually reveals the opportunity, access to racing results before the bookmakers know them. Step 2. The convincer. Before the big bet, the mark is allowed to win a small one, sometimes several small ones. This is critical. It's a proof that the system works. It transforms the mark from a skeptic into a believer. And once someone believes something is real, they're willing to risk a lot more to defend that belief. Step 3. The Big Store. The Big Store was an entire rented building, fitted out to look like a wire service and betting parlor. Desks, equipment, 40 or 50 staff, all conmen or actors on the payroll. Playing customers, bookmakers, telegraph operators. The mark was brought into this environment and allowed to win, then brought back, and back again, until the moment they were ready to bet everything, at which point the horse loses. Absolute chaos. The bookmaker demands payment for the debt the mark has now incurred. Everyone scatters. The mark is ushered out and told, "Don't go to the police because you were betting with wire information," which is illegal. The store closes by the end of the day. New city, new mark, new setup. This is what Marr was describing. This is what David Ward put on film in 1973. The Sting came out in 1973. Paul Newman, Robert Redford, director George Roy Hill. It won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Screenplay. David Ward's script drew directly from Marr's documentation of the WireCon and The Big Store. I want to talk about what the film did get right, though, and what it cleaned up. Before I get into that, if this is your first time on the channel, thank you so much for checking out the video. It would mean the world to our team if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us out a ton. Every episode, I pull a new file and take it apart until you understand not just what happened, but what made it possible. That's the whole show. The film is excellent. I'm going to say that clearly and actually mean it. The mechanics are accurate. The convincer, the big store, the blow-off, the moment when the mark is sent away without being able to complain. These are all real techniques documented by Marr, reproduced faithfully on screen. The hierarchy is accurate. The specific roles, Roper, Inside Man, Shills, The Fixer, those are real titles from Marr's taxonomy. But the film is also, in several important ways, a cleaned up version. The real big con operations of the 1930s were not run by two charming friends with matching vests. They were run by organized criminal networks with political protection built in. The Fixer, in Marr's account, isn't a background detail. He's essential. The Fixer was typically a corrupt police official or politician who ensured that marks who tried to file complaints either found no case number opened or found themselves being investigated for illegal gambling instead. Without the Fixer, the big store didn't run. The con was dependent on institutional corruption as part of its infrastructure. The film implies this. It doesn't dwell on it. Because if it dwelled on it, the movie becomes a different kind of story. One where the charming heroes are operating inside a system that requires serious money going to actual criminals and corrupt officials to function. There's also the matter of what happened when Marx got angry. Marr documents cases where Marx, having been conned out of significant sums, unable to go to the police and aware that they'd been fooled, went to other channels, organized crime channels. Some big store operators of that era were beaten. Some were even killed. The film ends with a freeze frame. 2 guys grinning. The historical record ends with several of those guys changing cities quickly because someone with connections was looking for them. That's not a criticism of the movie. It's a better movie because it's not about that. It's just to say the real version was wilder. What I want to close out on is what made The Big Store the most technically sophisticated con ever documented, because it's different from everything else we've covered in this series. And the difference, well, it matters. In previous episodes, Victor Lustig sold you a story. Ponzi, he gave you a return. P.T. Barnum, he gave you an experience. Darwin, he built his secret room. In this episode, the big store operators built an entire alternative reality. The fundamental problem with any con is skepticism. Marks, they have instincts. They get nervous. They ask questions. They want to think about it. The big store's solution was to overwhelm skepticism with sensory evidence. You can't disbelieve a room full of people. You can't argue with the sound of telegraph machines. You can't maintain suspicion when 40 strangers are going about their business around you, completely ignoring you. Your brain is not built to generate the hypothesis, every single person in this building is pretending and it's specifically for me. Marr called it the convincing atmosphere. The mark wasn't just told a story. The mark was placed inside a physical story and allowed to act within it. This is the architecture that David Ward understood when he wrote The Sting. And it's the reason the film feels so satisfying. You, the audience, are in on it from the start, which means you experience the big store the way the con men did, not the way the mark did. But the mark never had that advantage. And that asymmetry, that perfectly engineered gap between what the victim knows and what's actually happening around them, is what made it work every single time. Every time I close a file, I ask the same question. Why did it work? The big store is actually the easiest answer we've had yet, because the answer isn't psychological, it's architectural. Environment over argument. The big store's essential insight is that you cannot talk someone into believing something against their will, but you can place them inside an environment where their senses confirm the belief without their permission. The mark isn't convinced, the mark is shown. That's a completely different mechanism. The convincer. The small winning bet is the most important moment in the entire operation.